My parents helped my brother buy a house and told me to keep renting. 2 years later, he asked, "How did you afford that house?" I smiled and said, "Which one?" The strange thing about being the forgotten son is that people stop noticing what you're building. I was 31 years old, sitting at my parents' dining room table in Columbus, Ohio, on an ordinary Tuesday evening when my mother slid an envelope across to my younger brother. 30 seconds later, Mason's eyes nearly popped out of his head. "Holy crap, you're serious?" Dad grinned. "You're ready, son. Maybe you're right." Mom squeezed my hand. "We just want what's best for you." I nodded. But inside, I made a decision. I wouldn't tell them anything. Because for 3 years, while everyone worried about Mason's future, I'd quietly been building my own. No vacations. No fancy car. No expensive hobbies. My 2010 Honda Civic had 210,000 miles and a check engine light that had become part of the dashboard decoration. But I had $34,000 saved. And I had spent every night studying real estate. Books. Forums. Courses. Seminars. Actual investors. Actual numbers. Not dreams. Then I called the only person who knew I'd been working toward this. Nate Walker. He answered immediately. "What's up?" I did it. "Did what?" "I closed today." Silence. Then no way. "Way. Dude, that's incredible." I couldn't stop smiling. "I actually own a property." "You tell your family?" "No." "Still." I laughed. "Still. You're unbelievable." "Maybe. But I already knew how that conversation would go. Dad would explain why it was risky. Mom would worry. Mason would smile that little smile. And somehow I'd leave feeling smaller than when I walked in. I wasn't letting anyone take this moment away from me. Not this time. I drove straight to the duplex. The place looked even rougher in person. Tall weeds. Faded paint. A garage door that had clearly survived several decades through pure stubbornness. But it was mine. I knocked on Unit A. A woman in her 50s opened the door. Warm smile. Kind eyes. "You must be Ethan." "That's me." "I'm Elena." She smiled. "The new owner?" I almost laughed hearing those words. "Yeah. The last landlord never fixed anything," she said. "Bathroom sink's been leaking for months. I'll take care of it this weekend." Her eyebrows rose. "Really? Really?" She smiled. "So why'd you think I promised her a vacation?" And suddenly I realized something. I wasn't just buying buildings. I was building something. Responsibility. Freedom. Security. Purpose. That weekend, I spent 14 hours fixing things. Light fixtures. Leaky faucets. Broken garbage disposal. I made 3 trips to Home Depot. Spent $260. And learned that YouTube tutorials are far more optimistic than reality. Elena brought me homemade lemonade around lunchtime. "You didn't have to do this yourself," she said. "I told you I would." She smiled. "The last owner said that too." I tightened one last pipe under the sink. Turned on the water. That evening was Mason's big celebration dinner. He'd closed on his own house 2 days earlier. Actually, Mom and Dad had helped him close. The entire family was there. Mason and his wife Claire spent the night showing everyone pictures. 4 bedrooms. 2-car garage. Huge backyard. Mom practically vibrated with excitement. "Show them the kitchen again." Dad raised his glass. "To smart investments." Everyone cheered. I cheered too. Honestly, I was happy for him. But I couldn't help noticing something. Nobody asked about me. Not really. After dinner, I was loading the dishwasher. As usual, Dad walked into the kitchen. "Your brother's really making something of himself." "Yeah. That's what happens when you make good decisions." I stayed quiet. He grabbed a beer. "You know, Ethan, you could have all this too." I smiled. "Could I?" "Of course. But you've got to stop settling. Find a real career. Think bigger." I almost laughed. Think bigger? If only he knew. "I'm doing okay, Dad." He shrugged. "If you say so." Then he added something that stayed with me all week. "Just don't wait too long to grow up." Grow up. I stood there with soap bubbles on my hands and looked down at the dishes. And right then, I made another decision. One property wasn't enough. I was buying another. Not because I needed to prove anything. Not anymore. One unit sat vacant because of water damage. But the numbers worked. And after weeks of negotiation, I bought it. $109,000. The roof cost nearly $13,000. It hurt. Badly. But by January, both units were rented. And suddenly, Property 1 generated $550 monthly. Property 2 generated $650. $1,100 every month. Not enough to retire, but enough to breathe. enough to sleep, enough to believe. And my family still had absolutely no idea, which, strangely enough, was becoming kind of fun. By the time January rolled around, something strange had happened. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. Not because I was making crazy money, not because I had inherited anything, but because two ugly duplexes on opposite sides of Columbus were quietly paying me every month. It wasn't glamorous. I still drove the same Honda Civic, still lived in the same tiny apartment, still bought groceries based on whatever happened to be on sale. But underneath that ordinary life, something was changing. For the first time, I felt secure. And security, I'd learned, was worth more than appearances. Most weekends, I was either fixing something, reviewing numbers, or answering calls from tenants. Which was exactly why nobody noticed anything. Everyone assumed I was still just working maintenance at the apartment complex. That changed in February. I'd left my full-time job in December. Not because I was rich. Far from it. But several small landlords I'd met through local real estate groups had started asking me for help. Tenant screening, maintenance coordination, rent collection. Nothing glamorous. Just the stuff I already knew. Before long, I was managing properties for other investors while running my own. Flexible hours. Same income. Much less stress. Sunday dinner came around again. Same table. Same pot roast. Mom worried about everyone. And Mason spent 20 minutes complaining about HOA fees. $300 a month, he groaned. It's robbery. Dad laughed. That's homeownership. Mason shook his head. And property taxes. And insurance. I swear, owning a house isn't all people think. I quietly ate my food. Meanwhile, 2 duplexes and 4 tenants had paid me while I sat there. Rachel suddenly looked at me. So, Ethan, what have you been up to? Working mostly. Dad perked up. Still at the apartment complex? Not exactly. Mom looked concerned. What does that mean? I do some consulting now. Dad smiled. Consulting? Sounds fancy. Nothing like that. I help small landlords manage properties. Mason laughed. So basically you're fixing toilets in multiple places now. Everyone laughed. I smiled too. Something like that. What I didn't say was this. Those toilets belong to me. And every clogged drain, every broken garbage disposal, every late-night maintenance call was making me richer. Not instantly. Slowly. Quietly. Consistently. After dinner, Mom found me at the sink. Naturally. Because somehow, I'd become the designated dishwasher 15 years earlier, and nobody ever questioned it. She dried a plate beside me. You seem different lately. Different how? Happier. I smiled. Maybe. She looked relieved. I worry about you, sweetheart. I know. If you ever need help, I know. She squeezed my shoulder. And for some reason, I suddenly realized something. Mom wasn't trying to hurt me. Neither was Dad. They had simply decided who I was years ago. And once people decide who you are, they stop looking for evidence that they're wrong. They only notice things that confirm what they already believe. And in their minds, I was still the quiet kid who never took risks. They had no idea I'd already changed. By spring, I was ready for property number 3. Sarah thought I'd lost my mind. Ethan, normal people take vacations. I know. Normal people sleep. I know. Normal people don't buy 3 properties in 1 year. I grinned. Then it's a good thing I'm weird. She laughed. I'll give you that. This one wasn't another duplex. It was a small cabin near Hocking Hill State Park. The owner was tired, divorced, burned out, done with tenants. She wanted out. The place wasn't fancy, but I saw something she didn't. Potential. I offered $146,000. She accepted within 24 hours. Then I spent nearly $8,000 furnishing the place. Facebook Marketplace, discount stores, IKEA, anything that looked nice without destroying my budget. Nate came over while I was putting together bar stools. He stared around the room. Dude. What? You realize you're building an Airbnb? Hopefully. No, seriously. This is awesome. I laughed. It still needs work. Everything always needs work with you. He wasn't wrong. 3 weeks later, I listed the cabin. And 3 days after that, it was booked. By summer, the little cabin near Hocking Hills was bringing in nearly $2,800 a month. After expenses, I was clearing around $1,700. Combined with the duplexes, I was finally making real money. Not flashy money. Freedom money. The kind that lets you breathe. The kind that helps you sleep. The kind that makes you stop checking your bank account every 3 hours. One afternoon, Nate and I sat on the cabin porch drinking coffee. He looked at me and shook his head. You know what's crazy? What? You never talk about proving your parents wrong anymore. I thought about that. He was right. A year ago, that had been everything. Now, not so much. Because somewhere between fixing sinks, replacing roofs, and building spreadsheets at midnight, I'd stopped trying to win their approval. I was building something for me. Not for them. Not for revenge. Not for validation. For peace. Still, life had a funny way of testing that. Because in August, at Mason's birthday barbecue, Dad's old friend David Foster walked over while I was flipping burgers. David owned commercial properties all over Ohio. He'd known our family forever. Ethan. Hey, David. Your father tells me you're doing property management now. Something like that. He nodded. Good business. Then he asked casually, You investing yourself? I paused. Dad looked over. Mason looked over. Even Mom looked over. And for a second, I almost told them everything. Instead, I smiled. A little. David grinned. Smart man. Real estate builds wealth better than almost anything. Mason laughed. Not Ethan. He just manages apartments. David looked confused. No, son. Managing properties and investing are two different things. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Mom stared at me, and I simply smiled. Because for the first time in my life, I realized something. I wasn't hiding anymore because I was afraid. I was hiding because I enjoyed the peace. But secrets have a funny way of refusing to stay buried. And before the year was over, mine was about to end up in the newspaper, and nobody in my family would see it coming. By September, property number 4 wasn't just another investment. It was the one that changed everything. Not because it was glamorous. It wasn't. Another duplex. Another set of tenants. Another roof that needed attention. Another stack of paperwork. But this one pushed my portfolio to a level that finally felt real. For properties. And more importantly, enough monthly income that I no longer needed property management contracts. For the first time in my life, my time belonged to me. That felt stranger than I expected. When people asked what I did, I never really knew how to answer. Real estate. Investing. Property management. Most people heard whatever they wanted to hear. And honestly, I preferred it that way. By Thanksgiving, I'd skipped several Sunday dinners. Not because I hated my family, but because every visit left me feeling like I was visiting an old version of myself. One that didn't exist anymore. Then Mom called. Not texted. Called. Ethan. Hey, Mom. I miss you. My chest tightened. Sorry. I've been busy. I know. But Thanksgiving isn't the same without you. I smiled. Okay. Promise. I promise. When I arrived, the house smelled exactly the way it always had. Turkey. Bread rolls. Cinnamon. Memories. For a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. Until Mason stood up halfway through dinner. He had that smile. The one people wear when they're trying not to burst. Claire squeezed his hand. Dad grinned. Mom was already tearing up. Mason cleared his throat. We've got news. Everyone smiled. Claire laughed nervously. We're having a baby. The room exploded. Mom cried. Dad nearly knocked over his chair, hugging Mason. Rachel screamed. Tom high-fived everyone for reasons nobody understood. And honestly, I smiled too. I was happy for them. I really was. But while everyone talked about nursery colors and baby names, Dad said something that caught my attention. Dude, investment properties are expensive. I'm aware. Dad shook his head. Ethan, you need to be realistic. Real estate isn't for beginners. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I'd heard that exact sentence before. The difference was, now I knew he was wrong. I appreciate the advice. The conversation moved on, but I caught the glance between Dad and Mason. The same one I'd seen for years. We'll straighten him out later. After dinner, Mason found me in the kitchen. Of course. Where else? You know I wasn't trying to insult you, right? I know. It's just, owning a house is harder than I thought. I looked over. What do you mean? He laughed quietly, but another voice spoke louder. The tired voice. The one that had spent 31 years trying to be enough. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. So I agreed. Lauren met me at a coffee shop downtown. She was professional, prepared, and surprisingly easy to talk to. She asked about my strategy, my mistakes, my goals. Then she asked a question I'd never really considered. Did your family help you get started? I smiled. No, they didn't. They didn't even know. Her pen stopped. They don't know. I shook my head. No. Why? I laughed softly. Because they didn't think I was capable. She looked up. And what changed? I thought about that. Really thought about it. Then I answered. I stopped waiting for permission. She smiled. That's a headline. I laughed. No, it's just the truth. She scribbled something down, then smiled again. People are going to love this story. I didn't believe her. I figured maybe a few thousand people would read it. Maybe a couple friends would send congratulations. Nothing more. I definitely didn't expect it to blow up my entire family. But on January 8th, everything changed. I woke up to an email. Subject line, your feature is live. I clicked and froze. There it was. My picture. My name. Then is it true? Yes. Another pause. And then words I'd never expected to hear. Ethan. How? And for the first time in my life, I finally had an answer. But I had no idea that Sunday dinner, 5 days later, would change our family forever. And it would all begin with a question. A simple question from Mason. The same brother who once laughed at me. The same brother who'd been handed everything. He would look at me, completely confused, and ask, wait, how did you afford that house? And I'd smile, take a sip of water, and answer with 4 words. Which one are you asking about? The family group chat exploded before I even finished my coffee. Dad, Rachel, Mason, Claire, Mom. Message after message after message. Dad, call me. Rachel, wait, what? Mom, Ethan, please answer. Mason, bro, is this real? I watched the notifications pile up and felt something strange. Not anger, not satisfaction, just peace. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to convince anyone of anything. The work had already spoken. Finally, I typed. It's real. 3 dots appeared immediately. Dad replied. We need to talk. Sunday dinner. Everyone. Mom added, please come. I stared at my phone. Part of me wanted to say no. Protect my peace. Protect the life I'd built. Ethan. Before I could say anything, she wrapped her arms around me. I'm sorry. I hugged her back. It's okay. No. She shook her head. It's not. Her voice cracked. We didn't see you. Dad appeared behind her. He looked older. Tired. Not defeated. Just human. Come in, son. Everyone was already seated. Mason and Claire. Rachel and Tom. The nice dishes were out. Mom's emotional support pot roast filled the room. I sat in my usual chair. Nobody touched their food. Dad cleared his throat. We read the article. I nodded. And he looked down. I don't know how to say this. Mom wiped her eyes. We were wrong. Silence. Complete silence. Dad swallowed hard. I laughed when you talked about buying property. You did. I told you it was over your head. You did. I thought I knew who you were. He looked up, but I stopped paying attention. Mom nodded immediately. We thought you were struggling. I know. We thought you needed help. I know. And all this time, she whispered, you were building something. Mason leaned forward. Seriously, man. For properties? Yeah. How? I smiled. Slowly. He laughed. No, seriously. Dad nodded. Where did you get the money? I saved $34,000 over 3 years. Rachel nearly dropped her fork. You saved that much? No vacations. No new car. No eating out. Mason stared. And the rest? Bank financing. Equity. Reinvesting. Claire blinked. You learned all that yourself? Books. Courses. Mistakes. The article called you one of the most successful young investors in Columbus. I shrugged. That's their wording. Mason suddenly spoke. I owe you an apology. Everyone looked at him. He sighed. I knew Mom and Dad treated us differently. Mom looked shocked. Mason, no, Mom. He shook his head. I knew. He looked at me, and I took advantage of it. Silence. When they gave me 18 grand, I knew they never would have done the same for you. He laughed bitterly. I just didn't care. Nobody spoke. Then he said quietly, I'm sorry. And for the first time since we were kids, I believed him. Thanks. Dad cleared his throat. Ethan. Yeah. Can we see them? The properties? He nodded. What you've built. I looked around the table. At Mom's tears. Dad's regret. Mason's guilt. Rachel's disbelief. And I realized something. I didn't need revenge. Not anymore. I had wanted them to understand. And for the first time, they actually did. Sure. The following Saturday, I became their tour guide. Property 1 came first. The little duplex that started everything. Elena spotted us immediately. Ethan. She came over and hugged me. Then she turned to my parents. You raised a wonderful man. Mom started crying again. He fixes things before I even... Ethan. What? This is beautiful. Mason was unusually quiet. Until finally he asked, wait, He looked genuinely confused. How did you afford that house? I smiled, took a sip of coffee, and said the words that had lived in my head for 2 years. Which one? Silence. Rachel burst out laughing. Claire covered her mouth. Even Dad laughed. Mason just stared. You're kidding. Nope. The cabin. The duplex. The one on Maple Street. The newest one. I shrugged. Depends which house you mean. He shook his head. That's unbelievable. No. I smiled. It's just slow. We ended the day sitting outside a coffee shop. Steam rising from our cups. Sun beginning to set. Dad stared at me. I don't know what to say except. He paused. I'm proud of you. Not proud because I'd made money. Not proud because of the article. Proud of me. And somehow, that meant more than I expected. Mom squeezed my hand. Can we do better? I smiled. Maybe. She nodded. That's fair. But it's different now. Dad frowned. What do you mean? I looked at all of them. I'm not coming back as the disappointment. Dad nodded immediately. You shouldn't. If we're doing this again. I smiled. We do it as equals. Dad raised his coffee. Equals. Mason raised his. Equals. And for the first time in 31 years, I wasn't the forgotten son. I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the backup plan. I was simply Ethan Carter. And that was enough. Actually, it was more than enough. People like to think one conversation fixes everything. It doesn't. Life isn't like that. You don't erase 30 years of habits over pot roast and apologies. Trust takes time. Relationships take effort. And healing isn't something you announce. It's something you practice. But something had changed. Not overnight. Not perfectly. But genuinely. Mom called more often. Not because she worried. Because she wanted to talk. Dad started asking questions. Real questions. Not advice disguised as concern. And Mason? Just brothers. 3 months after that Sunday dinner, I closed on property number 5. Another duplex. Nothing glamorous. No ribbon cutting. No champagne. Just paperwork, keys, and another piece of the future. The numbers were good. The location was better. And for the first time, I decided not to keep it a secret. I snapped a picture. Nothing fancy. Just me, standing in front of the building in jeans and work boots, holding a ring of keys. Then I posted it. My first real post about real estate. The caption read, Property number 5. No inheritance. No trust fund. No family money. Just years of sacrifice, learning, mistakes, and refusing to quit. If you're waiting for someone else to believe in you before you start, don't. Start anyway. Most people only notice success after they ignored the work that created it. I set my phone down and went back to work. An hour later, I picked it up again. 200 likes. Messages from strangers. Questions. Congratulations. People telling me they'd started saving because of my story. And then I saw a comment that stopped me. Mom. Susan Carter. Always proud of you, sweetheart. I just wish I had shown it better. Love you. I sat there for a long moment. Then I smiled. And liked her comment. Nate called that evening. 5 properties. Apparently. He laughed. Apparently? You're basically a real estate mogul now. I looked down at my muddy boots. I'm still the same guy. No. He laughed. Same Honda Civic? Yep. Check engine light. Still there. Still buying discount coffee? Absolutely. He laughed. But now it's by choice. And he was right. That was the difference. Not the money. Not the properties. Choice. Freedom. Peace. Those things mattered. Not appearances. Not proving people wrong. Not expensive cars. Just peace. A week later, Dad called. Hey, son. Hey. Your mother and I were talking. Oh. He laughed. No, nothing bad. We want to take you to dinner. Dinner. Properly celebrate. My choice. Anywhere. I smiled. A year ago, I'd have thought there was a catch. Dad laughed softly. I know. So. Tuesday work. Tuesday works. We hung up. And I sat there smiling. Not because things were perfect, but because people can change. Sometimes slowly. Sometimes awkwardly. But they can. Later that evening, I drove to the place that started everything. Property 1. The little duplex on the east side of Columbus. The paint could use refreshing. The gutters needed work. And the grass desperately needed cutting. But I loved it. Because it reminded me where I started. Elena was outside watering flowers. She waved. Evening, Ethan. Evening. Everything okay? I smiled. Yeah. Actually, everything's pretty good. She grinned. You deserve it. Maybe. Maybe not. But I'd earned it. I sat on the front porch as the sun dipped below the trees. And for a while, I just listened. Birds, cars in the distance, wind moving through the leaves. My phone buzzed. A text from Mason. Need some advice. Thinking about buying a rental property. I laughed. Then another message arrived. And before you say anything, no, I'm not asking mom and dad for money. I smiled. Progress. Real progress. Then one final text appeared. Seriously though, how many houses do you own now? I stared at the screen, smiling, and typed back for simple words. Which ones are you counting? 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, you're never letting me live that down, are you? I laughed out loud and looked at the little duplex. The place everyone else would have ignored. But sitting there, watching the sunset from the porch of the first property I'd ever bought, I finally understood something. Success wasn't revenge. Success wasn't money. Success wasn't hearing people say they were proud of me. Success was waking up every day and liking the life I'd built. A life that belonged to me. Not perfect, not easy, not flashy, but mine. Completely, undeniably, mine. And honestly, that was more than enough.